Hello and welcome to Media 7. This week, how we see the Pacific and how the world sees us. Later in the show, we'll look at how 100% pure New Zealand is bearing up after a decade as the cornerstone of our tourist marketing. But first, a return to Fiji. The troubled island nation has been the subject of some notable journalism lately, although you may have missed it. In one case, a series of reports, some of them well off the beaten track, by Radio New Zealand Pacific correspondent Richard Pamatato. The other, a tense, absorbing interview with Fiji's leader, Commodore Frank Bainimarama, for Maori Television's Native Affairs program. That went like this.
In Fiji, you don't come up with your own vote. Your vote is dictated by the chiefs. It's dictated by the Great Council of Chiefs. It is dictated by the Provincial Council. It is dictated by the church. So it's not your vote. So don't tell me that it's democracy.
How do you react when people continually bring up those 2006 results?
This is our one and only chance. We can right the wrong that has been with us. We've had 4 coups. We don't want any more coups. People don't understand what's happening in Fiji, what our politics is like, and people do not want to understand what's happening here because you want to interfere in the way we do business.
So
what would you do?
You feel Fiji's being bullied by principally New Zealand and Australia?
Yes, because you don't understand what's happening here, what we're trying to do. All you see is a military removing a elected government, and it wants to remain in power for the next 5 years. We want to move the nation forward instead of keeping us in the old cannibalistic days. Changes are brought about by making, by having strict controls of your lives every day, and it's not going to come about through election. The elections is not going to bring about changes.
I'm joined now by the interviewer on that Native Affairs program, Julian Wilcox, and by Richard Pamatato of Radio New Zealand. Welcome to you both, gentlemen. Julian, was that interview as tense in places as it looked?
Not really. Not for me.
Was that just the way you edited it?
Yeah, no. It was, you kind of get absorbed in it yourself, you know. You're thinking about what your next question is going to be and what he's saying and how you're going to react to it and all that kind of thing. And so I just kind of got caught up in that. But for everyone else who was there, for the crew, for our senior reporter, Carmen Parahi, who was able to get the interview in the first place, she was really... There was a couple of times where she was thinking, I think we need to take a break because he's either going to blow or we're going to get kicked out. And I wasn't aware of that at all, you know, and especially when we started talking about media harassment and he, you know, started to play the man rather than the ball and...
He did not want to talk about that, did he? He was very sensitive about the... I mean, he even claimed at one point in the interview that we don't censor the media, which you were able to quite easily demonstrate.
Yeah,
was not the case.
The particular example that we gave where we knew that a certain person of the media in Fiji had been harassed, that's when he really started to react. And he tried to deny it and kind of talked around it and all that kind of stuff. And then, interestingly enough, after we finished the interview, he basically said, yeah, I harassed him. I did.
Why do you think he wouldn't say that on camera?
Not too sure. Because there are a lot of things I would have thought he wouldn't have said, like talking about authoritarian power, like talking about soft government in the Pacific. There are just things I sat there and thought, gee, that's really interesting. You said that out loud. And then
I was going to ask you about that later on.
Yeah. There were a couple of times here where I wanted to look at him and go, are you serious? But, you just had to keep rolling with the flow of it. But then after the interview, when he said, yes, I harassed this particular person and I did it because this, and this, knowing at the time that the cameras weren't rolling and we'd had to strike some of the crew because the meeting with Support Reeves was immediately after that. And his Minister of Information was there and he knew that I'd probably mention it to someone, but he still felt that he had to say that. I don't know why, but it was interesting that he did.
So you weren't concerned that things would go horribly wrong and you'd have your tapes confiscated and you'd be kicked out? Because I read Carmen's story in the Sunday Star Times, and that clearly was an issue for her off camera.
It wasn't so much until we went and talked to people on Fiji TV, and one person in particular there said, what did he say? And we told her what he'd said and how the interview went. She said, you're not going to get out of the country. And you're certainly not going to get out of the country with your tapes. And then we started getting really worried because we had the tapes labelled Frank Bainimarama interview, tape 1, tape 2. And I said, strike that and put all blanks or something, so we can get out. And so we did, we relabelled them. But, you know, the reality was we were fine. But, yeah, people had warned us that there were things that could go wrong, that things might happen, and just to be careful about it. And so we had taken some precautions. But we remembered that he invited us. He wanted to talk to us. And so because of that...
but you'd been seeking an interview for, what, 3 years? Yeah,
especially Carmen had been pushing to get to him in some way, shape or form. And I think where it really happened was that at the Pacific Leaders Forum and the comments that have been made by Australian Prime Minister Kevin Rudd, the interview that we'd had with Prime Minister John Key, and then, of course, the suspension from the Commonwealth, I think there'd been a change in view perhaps in the leadership with Frank Bainimarama saying we think we need to get our point of view across. And so we were lucky because one of the media representatives in Fiji, a guy called Reyes Kayum, had come over to Māori television. And we wanted to get an interview about some of the things that were said at the Pacific Leaders Forum in Cairns. And he said, look, if you really want to know, come over. And we said, well, there's really no point unless we can talk to Commodore Bainimarama. And he said, you'll get the interview. And so there was a week of emails. They said we'd had it. And even then, some of us were still a little bit nervous about getting the interview. But they guaranteed that we'd get it, and we got over there and we got the interview. And I think it was because also having Sir Paul Reeves as the special representative for the Commonwealth there perhaps was another reason why he wanted to sit down and talk.
Now, Richard, have you ever been granted an audience with the Commodore?
I was granted an audience and then it was cancelled 30 minutes before we were due to speak, which was deeply disappointing. I'd spoken to Ratu Johnny Mandraiwiwi, to Ratu Elisa Tuasesi and a number of other people, Mick Beddoes. So I wanted to talk to the Commodore about their concerns. And they're not unhappy with everything he's doing, but there are obvious things we needed to talk about, and I had been very open-handed with his minders about what I wanted to talk about in half an hour before we are due to meet.
Do you have any idea why it happened? Why it was cancelled?
I have no idea why it happened, and I expect at some other stage we will talk. I think he's just a very random kind of person. And the people I were talking to described him as being like a spoilt child, somebody who just misbehaves if he gets his nose out of joint. And
You've probably written off your chance of ever getting one now, haven't you?
I think the Commodore will come to some senses at some stage. He needs to talk to people because there are issues that need addressing. I spoke to some Fiji media people who said that if you get him on a good day, he's great. I just didn't get him on a good day.
Was it an issue that you were from Radio New Zealand, which he would associate with the government? Because, Julian, that seemed to be something he was very interested in the independence of Maori television. Do you think that was an issue?
He's spoken with Radio New Zealand several times before. I don't think that was the primary issue. I think one of the big issues with the Commodore is how he's perceived, how he's seen. I was at a bar in Suva on the Friday night after I was meant to talk to him, and a young lawyer came up to me and said, oh, you're from Radio New Zealand. I said, yes, that's correct. And I was abused in a very, very frightening way. And I said to the people I was with, I actually am not going to stay here. And the abuse centred around, in New Zealand, you don't know what you're talking about. The Commodore will talk to people who are informed, and that's why he spoke to Al Jazeera. I'm not sure what its level of information is about Fiji and other people who he likes.
I think it was Maori Television, SBS and Al Jazeera. I mean, do you think, Julian, that he perhaps thought he might get a more sympathetic hearing from you?
Maybe. I'm not too sure. I mean, I think, you know, we started talking about rugby off camera when we sat down with him, and of course that kind of got him in a good mood. Yeah, and he, you know, and he was pretty effusive about the fact that he thought the All Blacks cheated. But anyway, when it got down to brass tacks in the interview, his natural reaction was to go for the throat. And I mean, as Richard said, a lot of people see him or view him as being a bit of a spoiled child. I'd say he's been used to being in charge of the military. He is used to getting what he wants. And he doesn't like being challenged on a lot of things. And some of the reaction I think you can see from when you talk to him, it's obvious that that's the way that's his natural kind of modus operandi with people.
And yet, Richard, you were able to pretty much wander around unmolested. You got out to the villages, which I don't have any other reporters done that recently?
Not recently, but that was because I went in there with an intention not to create a big fuss, just to go in and talk to people. And I rented a very inexpensive car, the cheapest car I could find. I didn't dress in a way that was going to draw attention to me. And I just talked to people for a long time before I went there and said, can I talk to your aunt? Can I talk to your uncle? how about your cousin talking to me? And maybe if that person wasn't available, somebody else was. And I had a list of people I could call when I arrived. And the interesting thing about that was, prior to leaving, people said, don't take any information with you. You will be followed around by the military. So I took no lists of contacts. And I just worked in a very low-key way. And the irony of that was I was driving between Nandi and Lautoka. So if you come out of the Suva airport, instead of turning right, you turn left. And I picked up a policeman who was hitchhiking with his kid, obviously finished his shift. And I said, I really need to get into the cane fields to talk to some people. And he said, I'll take you there. So we're going down a dirt road into the middle of the cane fields while the harvest is on, and he's taking me there. And I said, I'm from Radio New Zealand. He said, oh, that's all right. And actually, here are my contact details if ever you need anything, which I thought was very interesting.
It's one of those things that drops into your lap, isn't it?
It is. And after that, I just thought, actually, it's not that scary being here. Yeah. And I did a lot more stuff by myself. Although,
as Julian pointed out, the Commodore said some mildly scary things. I mean, his statement that democracy was no way to get things done. Is that a new level of rhetoric for him, or does he say those kinds of things?
No, I think it's, what I can gather anyway, it's pretty consistent with his view. The impression I get from him is that he thinks what he's doing is right for the country. He honestly believes that what he's doing is for the better of the country, and he honestly believes by withholding elections until 2014 that is the best way forward. And there are a lot of people that we talk to who support him in that. There are a couple of people that we talked to who weren't supportive of that, and they were scared about the fact that they are not free to be able to live their lives. They are not free to be able to do what they want when they want to do it. And when we said to him, well, there are a lot of people who see this as a military-run country, and he said straight away, well, it is. Well, oh, hang on a minute, what I meant was, and because a lot of people feel that on the ground, and those who are supportive of him that we talked to were pretty much in one era. They were either working or they were buying things from the market, and a lot of them were Indo-Fijian. When we talked to a lot of the indigenous Fijians outside of the cities, that wasn't the view that they had. So, and again, we're only there for a very short time, but it was a noticeable marked difference of views between those two separate groupings.
Did you find that too, Richard? That does seem that there are different views depending on where you are in Fiji.
Of course, the people I spoke to who would let me use their names are powerful people, Mick Beddoe, the Ratus, people like that, who have no fear of the Commodore and will speak out against him. The articulate, educated people who preferred me not to use their names, and I abided with that, were critical of him, but I don't want to use their names. A, I might need to talk to them again, and B, I think for them it's not worth it. I really don't think it is worth it.
Is it clear to you what the power structure is in Fiji? Is there some force behind the throne, or is Bainimarama genuinely in charge?
Again, it depends who you talk to. I think the real power behind the throne is the guns and the fact that he has them. And the irony about that is, talking to lots of people, they say what they are hoping for, dreaming for, is an extraction, where New Zealand, the United States, Australia come and remove him. A bit like a TV program. No, it's not going to happen, but it was interesting how often that came up, because without guns and without the bullying behaviour that allows him to do, he wouldn't be such a big stick.
Now, he seems to be full of solutions. Did either of you come away clear on exactly what he wants to do? I mean, he kept mentioning the People's Charter, but is it actually clear that he knows what he's doing?
Well, he was very vague on specifics with us. I mean, obviously we didn't have all the interview there. We edited it down a bit because we had a lot of tape, but when we tried to get specific with him about some of those economic reforms and the road to progress and all that kind of stuff that he's been talking about, the road to reform, he was very vague on that. In fact, he didn't mention it at all. He just said that there are reforms that are going to be taking place. He did mention the Constitution that they were going to be starting to develop in 2012. He said that was going to finish in 2013, but in terms of the economic reforms, he was very vague on that.
We'll talk a bit more about the economy actually after the break. We will take a break now and return to discuss the lives of ordinary Fijians. Just what is the real picture?